Welcome to the Revenue Blueprint. This is not another sales podcast on tips and tactics. Instead, we focus on unfiltered stories from founders and early stage sales leaders on what it takes to build a successful revenue team. If you get just a little bit of value from this, we ask that you pay it forward by liking, sharing, and subscribing to the podcast. All right, let's get into the episode. Another episode of the Revenue Blueprint. Today, we are very lucky to have Krysten Connor on the show. Krysten is one of the most well-spoken and best advice givers when it comes to sales on LinkedIn. She's been a top AE at a few different startups and has just recently moved into a new role at UserGems. So Krysten, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
I think you could have gone on with those accolades. I feel like I'm meeting a celebrity. I've been following your work on LinkedIn and learning from you. So I know we come right out of the gates with like hardcore flattery, but it's true. So
flattery will get you everywhere.
Yeah.
You're so nice. Thank you.
Before we get into things too deep, can you just tell us a little bit more about this recent transition you made and what this sales strategy role actually is?
Yeah, it's basically what we came up with because I wanted to stay involved with the team. And so what that practically means is at UserGems is that I will be concentrating even more on working with our marketing side to put out even more LinkedIn content. But then also I wanted to start building out some online courses and some playbooks. And so I wanted more time to do that, but I still wanted to stay involved with UserGems. So working with our marketing team and content marketing to help sales teams, and then also working with our own sales teams on deal strategy and just mentoring where I'm needed. So yeah, it's kind of a hybrid role that I'm very excited about. Kind of a dream job, actually.
All right. So I need to ask a question about that right away then, because that's very fascinating. And we are obviously in the business of content creation, so we understand it a bit. So this role, it sounds like it is a part of a transition for you to be more of a full-time, part-time content creator and entrepreneur, but also stay involved with UserGems.
Yeah, exactly. You said it better than I did.
So I'll come out with a hard question. You've probably seen this go poorly before. Sounds like you're the glue between the departments. Like what are you thinking about and how do you plan to make this a success? Because it feels like you're the perfect person for it. But what's your kind of rubric for that, or like how are you approaching this?
You're giving me way too much credit on multiple levels.
You deserve it.
By no means the glue. The sales and marketing at UserGems is, I've been very fortunate to work at organizations where sales and marketing has worked really well together, almost universally. UserGems is that on steroids. Like it's very, very tightly aligned. So I'm just really kind of adding a layer onto what is already a really good, intertwined relationship there. And as far as like how we plan to make it work, it's really a matter of finding out, it's constant experimenting to figure out what's working and what isn't. And that is, I know we're going to get into more of this later, but that's one of the reasons I wanted to work at a small startup. And one of the particular reasons I chose UserGems is the ability to pivot, right? When you see something that's working, when you see the market changing, like we need to be able to pivot quickly versus if you're at a 5,000 person or 50,000 person company, those pivot are a lot harder to do.
So, and I know Jason's chomping at the bit to get his questions, then I'm just going to cut him up because I'm so curious. What has made UserGems so successful at this up until this point? Because again, I think most companies don't do a great job at this and everyone wants to, but they don't. Is it the iterative approach? Is it the right kind of mindset culturally? Like, what do you think has been so special about this?
I think it's the mindset culturally for sure. And also like how aligned our leaders are. And I mean, this is going to sound like a really simplistic answer, but they've just done things that make sense. I mean, but it's odd to say that, but in organizations, I find that especially in very large organizations, sometimes they do things that don't make any sense. And sometimes when you ask I've asked some really kind of common sense questions, I felt like in large environments, and people look at you like that's the first time they've ever heard that. I don't know. It's very surprising. But also I would say the quality of leadership, like our VP of marketing was at HP. Like she's had fantastic background. And then Krysten, our founder, like they did sales, like every founder does when they get started. And so like they just didn't forget the things they learned other places and they're just doing things that make sense. That's my simplistic take on it.
But it needs to be practical and obvious and simple and rational and done with purpose versus because theory, someone did it once and it's or I read it on the internet. So
correct.
Work.
Yeah. I promise we're going to ask you about all your secrets and how you've been so successful. But last question on this topic is, you have been a successful enterprise account executive for a while. Why does now make sense for you to make this type of career change?
Partially it's because I've been kind of messing with content creation for a while and trying to figure out what is that perfect blend of like what I want to talk about versus what people want to know. And I think this kind of will lead into other parts of the conversation, which is what I realized is what started taking off is breaking down these concepts that everyone knows you should do or everyone is told you should do. Okay, well, how do you do that? And like speaking of like things that don't make sense, I can't tell you how many sales leaders told me early in my career, well, we really you're not really multi-threaded into this deal. We really need to multi-thread here. Excellent. I agree. How would you suggest that I do that? But they're just like, well, off to the next meeting and they're checking Slack on their phone.
You know what I'm talking about. I gotta
And you're
go.
like, yeah, I get it. I mean, I agree with the principle, but like I've been here 6 months. How do people successfully do that here? What are our playbooks for that? UserGems is the only place I've ever seen with a multi-threading playbook. Is that not astounding? Again, to speaking to like doing things that make sense. It's an interesting practice.
And I think that's why I like your content so much. I promise we'll stop flattering you. But like shedding light on things that I'm like reading and I'm like, yeah, that's like a nice way to put that and actually is clear and makes sense. So like I haven't heard it that way. It's like you unpack things in a very clearly you've done it, pragmatic, not know it all, but like this is kind of an angle on it that I see why people love it because I read it. I'm like, I haven't found anything I disagree with. I'm still looking, but like I'm sure.
I'm sure.
No,
we'll get
look,
there.
yeah.
I'm sure we'll get there.
No, but it's good. It's like health. It feels like purposeful and kind of meaningful and like and practical. Like I think it always goes back to like, are we speaking in theory or is it practical? It's just reasonable.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate that because that's the aim. The other thing is when I was early in my career and I feel like there's a lot on LinkedIn about prospecting or cold calling, which is great. Like people definitely need that content, but I was full cycle AE. And so I'm like, yeah, yes, I need help, setting these meetings, but then what? And what's interesting is that the people who are successful in mid-market, but especially enterprise roles, like they're usually folks that are pretty tenured in their career and they're just putting their heads down quietly and doing it. They're not. So it was like SDR, cold outreach, and then sales trainers. And there wasn't much in the middle of that. I mean, this was probably 4 years ago. So there's definitely more out there now. But part of it is just like part of what you read as far as content creation, especially for LinkedIn, is like, think about you 3 years ago. What did you want to know? Right. And so like, as I go about just my day thinking about, okay, well, what are we doing to close this? How are we creating urgency? What would I do for this interview prep? Then I'm thinking about, okay, well, 3 years ago, what would I have not known that I know now, and trying to do that. And the other thing is it kind of brings my whole career full circle because I started as a teacher. My dad always has these like really pithy sayings. And one of his favorite sayings is no education is ever a waste. And like in education, what you have to do is take a concept that no one that you're speaking to knows much about, or they have varying degrees of understanding, right? And then help them understand it in a way that's engaging. And so that has definitely come into play in sales, but I think it's also coming into play now where I'm trying to break down, I'm essentially teaching again, right?
And I love that. Like, what would you, when you were starting out, want to know from you now? And then, like, I mean, you're in selling this unlimited amounts of little bits that you're taking because you're clearly doing that with these different pieces. And be like, what would Krysten of 4 years ago or just getting started want to know? And I think it's a really great it's a secret. It's like a great way to look at like when we're creating content. What would somebody just getting started want to know in a meaningful way?
So, Krysten, when you and I were prepping for this conversation, we talked about some of the things that have separated you as an account executive over the years. So, what has been your superpower to be successful at various different roles?
Superpower it's a big word, but I would say a couple of things. One is I've always been a learner. I've always been curious. And so the ability to like take in a lot of information and quickly find the pattern, quickly find, what's helpful about that. And so especially, I mean, I'm always reading something. I have 3 sales books on my desk right now. I usually listen to a podcast while I'm getting ready. Is one of the things that I think when I was talking with the folks at 30 Minutes President's Club, they were saying something about we need to be reminded 10 times more than we need to be taught, right? It's so much of sales is not that you're learning all these new different things. It's, oh yeah, I did know I need to do this, and just being reminded of that. And so I'm constantly learning and taking in information. And the other thing I think that definitely made me different than definitely most people I knew starting out was I made a decision very early on to invest in myself and get a coach. At the time, like the rates I was paying for coaching were market rates, but very expensive relative to my budget. And it was a huge gamble on myself, like scary. Like I had to really think before I was like signed up for that.
Sorry to interrupt. Was that your transition from teaching to selling? When did you realize or decide you wanted to hire a coach?
Yeah. So I went from teaching to helping my dad run his insurance agency and learned I could run an insurance agency, but I didn't want to. And so then I had to think about really important, but very disappointing because it would have been a real easy transition. But then I had done selling for the agency, and I also in teaching and with the agency, I was always interested in tech. I was always the one pushing for more tech. There has to be a better way to do this. And so I was thinking about what do I want to do with my life? I like selling and I like tech. And so I'm like, okay, I want to get into tech sales, but it has to make sense for someone to hire me. And so luckily in Kansas City, where I was living at the time, there was a startup that sold to K-12 education. And I was like, okay, this is a story that makes sense because I know their buyer. And so they took a chance on me. Very grateful they did. And almost immediately after starting there, I was like, I have to have more help. I had never seen Salesforce. Like I had never seen the UI. Like insurance uses a completely different, completely antiquated like systems. Is very, I mean, same concept, but I mean, I was just learning everything. Like I can't tell you how many things I Googled in those first few months.
Sorry to interrupt. Were you a full cycle sales rep at that point?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
so you had to figure out how to create pipeline, move pipeline, close pipeline, and all of the culture of the business, selling, CRM. Yeah, I always talk about that with young people is,
Yep.
yeah, maybe you can be full, you can go right from school right into closing, but there may be easier, start as an SDR, learn a CRM, learn how to email, learn how to book pipeline. Sounds like you jumped right into the deep end, and I know how that used to be, and that used to be the only way, but it
Yeah,
sounds like it's quite a lot.
it was a lot. It was a lot.
I love that present Krysten is writing for that Krysten. Every post is for her.
Oh, for sure. Because yeah, I felt every day. I panicked a little every day the first 6 months. Then that's why I was like, I have to have a coach because I knew. And my leaders were very young and very new leaders. They were wonderful, but they could not keep up with the amount of coaching that I needed, which I think is very common, very common. And so, but I looked around and I was like, I don't know anyone else who's doing this, looking for coaching or paying for it. But it just got to the point where I was like, it doesn't matter what anyone else is doing. Like, this is what I need to do. And it made all the difference.
But what did that mean to you
10x.
then as a coach, right? Because I think that can take a lot of different varieties, but what did a sales coach mean to you then? And what did you actually get? And how would you set someone else up for success to do the same thing?
Yeah. So how he coached me is how I coach people now, which is like, I just set up sessions. We had a calendar link. I set up sessions with him. Sometimes it was twice a week. Sometimes it was twice a month to get help with different things. Like because I didn't have time to do like let's start at the beginning and give me this whole overview. I'm like, my pipeline for next quarter sucks. I am doing something wrong. Or I have, these 3 deals that are stalled. I have never created urgency in this environment. What are the levers that I can pull?
So how did you know you got a good coach? Who was it? How did it? I mean, you don't have to force them if you don't want to.
Yeah, no. Well, I mean, it wouldn't matter because he's retired anyway. But again, I did some deep research on the company that I was targeting, and the timing was fortunate because this guy had been their VP of sales before Vista and bought them.
Yeah.
And then he was starting a consulting business where he was coaching sales leaders and sales teams. And so actually I gave him some very candid feedback because he had started his website for coaching. And I looked at it, and at first I almost didn't call him because he had no social proof on there and didn't look credible at all. And I was like, who is this guy? And finally I looked him up on LinkedIn and I was like, oh, he's legit. And so when I reached out to him, I was like, hey, you didn't ask, but I have to tell you, like, you should put some social proof on your website because we almost didn't have this conversation. And I think he'd been a VP of sales at some very large organizations and very successful ones. And I think he was very surprised. He was just like, usually people don't tell me things like that, but it was very cool. Like, we should have.
Right, you're the buyer. I mean, you speak the truth. So
right. Yeah. Yeah.
So you found him. I think one thing you brought up that was really important is that you were asking for the things that you needed help with in the moment and that were most important to you then. You weren't
Yep.
looking for some like foundational sales course. And that's how I typically like to coach people as well is coach on the 2 or 3 most important things to them right now, and then you can fix other stuff later on. Can you talk about why that worked well for you?
Well, I think it's like a lab, right? And I think most people learn by doing. And I think that's why it's definitely worthwhile to listen to podcasts and read books, but you learn the best when you are actually doing it. Like you will cement those things in your mind. Like we talked about stories beforehand. Some of the most creative things came from like brainstorming with him. We were talking about deals that were stalled. I had 2 late stage deals that were stalled and they were like ghosting me, but I knew they need it. I was just like, they need this, they want this, but they're not responding. I don't know what is going on. And I was like, I've tried all these things. And my coach was like, have you tried sending them something in the mail? And I was like what? And so then what we came up with was I sent them like the biggest like Starbucks tumbler that I could find. And I put a handwritten note in there that said, hey, we haven't talked in a while, which means you must be buried. So you probably need as much caffeine as you could get. And when you can stick your head up, I'll be here. Let me know. I had a call from them within a week of them getting it, and I won both of those. But I would have never thought of that. I mean, I guess I could have, but it was just helpful to put heads together. And he had seen other things like that work. And so it was just like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. And coincidentally, I've never had that not work for when I've tried it. But there's a context, right? And making sure it's like the right deal. But yeah, super helpful.
So it just sounds like a lot of wisdom, and you're gaining that wisdom and imparting on others that you see, just like we were talking before, a large sample size. So you
Yep.
see a lot of different things, and you're like, oh, in this example, you can try these 3 different things, and
Yes.
these are the different nuanced ways of doing it. It's just tough to learn on your own as a young salesperson who isn't getting that coaching. That's oh, in this situation, you just do this.
Yeah.
It's easy to like.
How long was he
What?
your coach for? Oh, sorry. Go on.
So 3 years. And one thing I would say, and I've done this not just with not specifically coaches, but with like mentors. And I wrote about this a while ago on LinkedIn. There are people who on LinkedIn will list in their profile as retired. And so like if there are VPs of sales that have their tagline as retired. So look for that. If you want to coach, and you can't get better than someone who's been a VP of sales for 10 years or whatever. And if they're retired, guess what? A ton of people used to report to them. A ton of people used to need their advice. Like they're probably not, they're probably not getting that now. And also like it's people want to share their
Yeah.
wisdom, right? And nobody's asking them for that anymore. I did this with 3 retired bank presidents when I sold to banking because banking and insurance were in my book at Tableau, but I'd never sold to banking. Insurance I knew. And I was like, I have to know how to do this and what their vocabulary is and what matters to them because it's a very specific kind of thing. So I found 3 retired bank presidents on LinkedIn and I was just like, hey, I want to learn from you. I promise I will not pitch you. I will not ask you for your network. Like, here's what I want to know. I want to know what my buyer cares about. I want to know their vocabulary and I want to know what they're reading. If you will meet with me for 30 minutes and just talk about those things, I will just take notes. And 2 of them had 1 session with me and 1 of them had 4 sessions and all of them introduced me to someone. I didn't ask, but they were just like, this is a person that is legit that wants to learn. And it was so valuable. And there was no way that I could have gotten that kind of knowledge just by reading like, industry articles.
Slowly adds retirement to LinkedIn profile.
But it seems very obvious now that you talk about it in retrospect, but that's such good advice and such a good tactical way to go about learning about things and like the added bonus on top of, yeah, they made introduction. Did those folks charge you at all?
Nope.
Look at that. Look at that. So, and do you have a coach now anymore?
I still sometimes go back to the coach that I used before, just like on a one-off thing. And I've done some like coaching cohorts, like some group things that are focused on certain skills. So that's more of what I do now is more, I still more one-off things, right? What do I need now? What am I looking for now? The next coaching like cohort I go in will probably be based on more content creation than sales. But yeah, I want all the knowledge from all the people because that's how you
Yeah.
learn the fastest.
Let's stick on this coaching theme just for a second. How would you advise a VP of sales or a founder who's got a handful of sales folks to coach a top sales rep versus a middle of tier sales rep, especially if they're pretty strapped for time?
Yeah. One of the I think that sometimes we think that sales leaders always have to do the coaching themselves, or they think that. And that is, I think, a small way to look at it because there are so many ways now that can happen. So Aspireship has an amazing like SCR and AE training and certification program. Kevin Dorsey has a Udemy class that's 20 to 75 bucks depending on when you see it. And those are overviews, right? So if you have a brand new person, like there's a lot of ways that you don't have to have this built out onboarding program because you have 300 reps. Like you can pay for someone to take a valuable class and learn those skills. The other thing that I've found really helpful is just peer-to-peer coaching and meetings. One of the companies I worked for, in their onboarding and mentoring program, they would take somebody who had just been onboarded and have them mentor someone else because the person who just learned the thing is going to be the best teacher of the thing because they know what it's like to be new versus somebody who's done it 5 years ago. I mentioned in the first startup I was a part of, my sales leadership was very new. They were very strapped for time. One of the things that we did was called Get Better Fridays. And we came in early on a Friday. We had breakfast and he would just select people that had something that was working, tenured or new, and say, Brian, I know you had something that works this week. Tell us what it was. Krysten, you had something that worked this week. Tell us what it was. And so it just facilitated. It was just in the moment very quickly. It wasn't, super built out, but some of the best ideas that were the most creative that I did in that role came from those things. And you learned, right? Like learnings can come from anywhere. And also he didn't have to prepare anything. It was just right there.
Yeah, he was just facilitating. And I think I'm curious your thoughts on this as a teacher yourself, but I think one of the best ways to learn something is to teach it. And
Oh,
so
yeah,
if
absolutely.
if you want to level up your team, just have them teach something and they will instantly get better at
Absolutely. 100%.
And
it.
then sorry, I just love this theme of taking some of your best reps that are actually doing it, that are better than the VPs. So they were all better than me. They're doing it in real time. Have them train on what they're exceptional at to level up everyone across that. And it ends up being this like team. Everyone's caring because everyone's a mentor to everybody working on different things. Also, you can kind of step back as the VP of sales and be like, you run the
Yeah,
onboardings, you lead the training sessions. It's like, why not the best people that are better than the leader at doing it do the teaching? It's so powerful.
obviously, I want to add one caveat to that. Like, obviously, those best reps are still being comped on like their sales activity, right? So we want to respect their time. So,
Sure.
record them teaching, a session or, don't ask them to speak to every new hire class or whatever. All the tenured AEs will suddenly hate me if they're getting pulled into all these things. But I would say like Tableau had one of the best enablement programs I ever saw. And anytime enablement rolled out like this is the new way we want you to do things, they would not teach it themselves. They would have one of the best reps who had done it that way for a while come in and teach it. And they would say, here's Casey. She did 3x of her quota last year. She's been to President's Club 4 times. She's going to tell you about the new thing we're doing that she's been doing for a while. And then she would tell the story about what worked for her. And you better believe we were all taking notes, like not slacking each other, which if a VP of sales, said that, maybe the response would have been a little different.
But it goes back to this theme throughout of practicality. If Casey was
Yeah.
doing it, she was 3x her quota, then enablement should probably use that because it's working. And then who better than Casey to teach it because it's working? It's not enablement being like, I read something on the internet, or I read a book, and now we're doing the challenger sale. And Casey's, I don't do the challenger sale, and I'm 3x quota. Why would we do this? So then the top reps are like, I'm actually not doing that. And it just breaks down in that theory, politics, kind of
Correct.
chaos.
And then, so the tenured reps know what's working. And so they just quietly check out and, and certify on the deck because they have to, and then go back to doing it the way that was working. And then you have new reps who are confused because they're being told this is the way we're doing it. And then they talk to, the good reps and they're like, hell no, I'm not doing it that way. And so then they're like, what do I do? It just creates a
The
problem.
beginning of the downfall of the sales organization before the VP of sales gets fired and then rebuilds the whole thing back up. Yeah, it's a cycle.
Right.
Something else that's, I think, pretty unique about you is you basically only pick winners in terms of companies that you've worked at. So can you walk us through some of your decision-making process when you've chosen companies that you wanted to work at along the way?
Investors are taking notes. Pick winners only. What is she doing? Winners.
Well, so when I got into tech sales, like I mentioned, like I had to make a huge transition. I had no background in tech. I had some background in sales, but never in tech. And so, like I said, I had to tell a story that made sense for someone to take a chance on me, right? So if you're trying to pivot roles or pivot industries, don't expect people to connect the dots. Your resume, your LinkedIn, every answer to any question that's ever asked of you has to connect the dots. Chase Caloff, one of our new AEs at UserGems, just wrote a post on LinkedIn about how he did that because he was a part-time poker player before he got into sales. And he's like, I had to connect the dots. And the way he did it was beautiful. And you're like, that makes complete sense. Of course you would do this. So then your first kind of move, you have to be able to connect the dots and do that for someone else. Then when that company got bought out by a larger company, I was looking to move, and how I ended up at Tableau was embedded in one of the products that we used at that company. And I absolutely fell in love with it. Like I saw it and I made the product manager demo it for me multiple times. And I would get so mad when our clients didn't know what she was showing them. I'm like, how do they not see how valuable this is? And she was like, you love this so much. Like maybe you should work there. Like maybe I should.
You love it so
And
much, why don't you marry them?
right, exactly. Will, thank you very much. And and that's the pattern of one of the patterns of what I've done is I have taken things that I've been passionate about. The reason I get into education, I was passionate about making a difference. And the reason I was passionate about selling to them is I was like, this is a way that I can help educators. And that's how I viewed it. Whenever I got to Tableau, the business implications of that, and also because I had run a business and had been the buyer and knew what that but being able to see your data would do for them. Like I was on fire about that. And your energy is contagious. If you don't like the product, if you don't believe in it, ideally you've used it, right? That makes a huge difference. And then when I went from Tableau and Salesforce to Outreach, that was about knowing and liking my buyer and the conversations that I would have. And I don't think people think about that enough. They're just like, oh, this is a great company. Oh, this is a great product. Dude, if you don't like selling to IT, which God bless them, I do not, and they don't like me either, because we just don't function in the same way. Like I use the word automagically. I don't care how the sausage is made. Like I'm smart, but I'm not technical. And so that was not my buyer. I did not enjoy having those conversations. In teaching or like in education sales, you can't talk about ROI because they don't make decisions that way. And I was like, any buyer where I can't talk ROI is not my buyer. And also like education tends to be more skeptical and more late to the party versus tech and sales is early and they want to try things. So that was like more a match for my personality. And so I would say, think about the conversations that you want to have all day long. Because if you don't like those conversations, that will drain your energy and it will show through. And the flip side of that is true as well. If you love what you're doing and what you're selling, and if you read about it in your spare time, that's going to come through. And it will come through in your interview too, right?
For sure. That's so much wisdom in selecting. I mean, obviously hard one and you learned it, but selecting what type of thing you want to sell. It's not just that you might not even like the thing that much, but if you like
Right.
who you're talking to about the value of the thing and it just feels great. Yeah, it's so important. You're getting into mental health a bit around, do you enjoy your job? Do you enjoy what you're doing all day? And then because it's compounded by the pressures of goals and quota and
Yeah.
sales and context switching and all that. So it's like there has to be some core
Yeah.
enjoyment to it,
Correct.
or you're not going to persevere.
Honor.
And what you're saying resonates with me so much. And that was when I was interviewing people at Closer IQ all the time. I talked about, hey, we work with startups. We want people that are interested in startups, are studying them, reading TechCrunch on their own. But that was very easy for me to do. And it wasn't very easy for a lot of other people to do. And I probably should have indexed a bit more on that, because those are the people that are going to have the most sustainable careers, especially in a sales role.
Yeah, 100%. That's why I think the question, in interviews of, what's something that you're reading? What do you read in your spare time? What do you do in your spare time? Like just to gauge like how interested are they in this thing? And also notice the energy that they come at you, that they bring to that, that they bring to it, right? Yeah, I would, when I interviewed at Outreach, I was like, excuse the fangirl like energy that's coming from this, because I use your product. I love it. I wouldn't go anywhere that didn't have, it was that
Isn't
kind
that a
of a,
great qualification criteria of hiring, of that you like the thing? You'd think. I mean, it worked out.
yeah.
Sounds like they recognized it. They were smart enough.
Yeah. But again, like who your buyer is, like I think of it like real estate, right? In real estate, location is the one thing you can't change. In sales, like your buyer is the thing you cannot change unless you change jobs. And once I realized I was frustrated by the buyer in education, look, it's not them, it's me. Like they're going to be who they're going to be. Like they're not going to change. So if I don't like it, I can stay and complain and be miserable, or I can find something else that's a better fit.
You're talking about buyer a bit, and we're talking about different types of sales. And one of the ones that, I'm curious about is the transition from mid-market and enterprise. And you talked about different tactics. One of the biggest kind of challenges that folks face, and maybe reasons that they fail in transitioning from mid-market into enterprise?
Mid-market to enterprise is one of the biggest transitions. I don't think that's talked about enough. I don't think
Just use
Sit.
multi-threading. I don't know
Yeah.
what's the problem here, Krysten. I mean,
Right.
multi-thread.
Yeah.
I gotta go.
Right. I don't know that sales leaders think about that enough or communicate that enough, because if you take someone who's been stellar in mid-market, yeah, chances are like they'll probably be good in enterprise, but you have to really look at like a different skill set. So one of the biggest changes going in market to enterprise is, instead of the lead soloist, you are now the conductor, right? Like you have to now engage the entire orchestra, right? And it's better, in fact, if you are not the focus of attention. You want to bring in like those technical SMEs. You want to bring in your, customer success person to talk about like, how are they going to get value and all these different, you are coordinating all those things. And really, you're essentially like a project manager. You have to own all of the follow-ups. Did my VP promise they'd get this thing to them by next week? You can't count on the fact that they've done that. You have to follow up. Did the SC tell them they would get this technical resource to them, this, white paper or whatever? Did they actually do that? And along with that, it's 50% internal selling versus just external. Like my last deal at Salesforce, there were 20 internal people involved in that deal. And so and there were people competing for those experts' attention. And so then you have to figure out what matters, like what's important for them. Why should they come to my meeting versus the other ones? So you have to sell that deal. You have to be like, hey, this is the biggest deal that's going to happen on this team this quarter. Are you interested in being a part of it? Or this is the first X dollar deal that's going to be done with this industry. I think if you had your name attached to it, that'd probably be awesome for you. I'd love to see that for you. It's as much internal as it is external selling. And I hit my head hard on that when I first went from mid-market to enterprise. I cried a lot. I'm not going to lie.
Organizational skills, which is adjacent to project management, I guess one and the same, which
Yep.
is also operationally excellent. So you're extremely efficient with your organization.
Yep.
Externally, but then also internally, which I guess is a bit political, right? I mean,
Yep.
how do you convince that person to be a part of your project to help you win it? But you described as a bit of politics. So it's like recognizing that's going to be a component of it, or like shaping roadmap to get a custom build to close this deal how do you influence the roadmap and all of the stakeholders involved in that, and et cetera, et cetera. And which is, we don't want to say politics because startups, we'd like to have no politics, but if you're truly doing enterprise, there's going to be
It's
some
just,
political aspects of it. Yeah.
but it's also just human nature, right? Like it's like what's in it for them. And no one ever said that. But we are in sales. That is the thing. Like everything is a sale. Anytime you're trying to convince someone of anything, you are selling them something. And like, also like, how do you get support to prioritize their support tickets whenever they're still in a trial and they haven't really paid you anything yet? And support, has tickets a mile long. Like, you have to develop those internal relationships. Like, what kind of scotch does this person like to drink? And how do I get it to them every quarter so that when they see my name, they say work on
Is
it.
the title of your book "What's in it for you" or "What's in it for me"?
Right. Dude, if you ask yourself that question every time you interact with someone, like you'll be money ahead.
That's so much wisdom. Oh, I love it.
Yeah, I mean, it makes so much sense, right? You're competing for everyone's time and you're the orchestrator more so than anything else. You have to still be sharp at like truly understanding the buyer or what the things are that matter most to them. But none of that matters if you can't truly orchestrate the deal and pull the right strings.
Yeah. And one of the other things that I started doing somewhat in mid-market that I really did in enterprise, it should go without saying, but like internal, like prep docs, internal, like prep meetings, like you cannot show up on a call with 5 people when they don't know what their role is and they don't know what the outcome of the call. I mean, you can do it. I just wouldn't advise it. And like you have to be prepared. Like you are asking for these people's time, not for just an external meeting, but for an internal prep meeting. So you need to have your doc ready, showing like, here's all the roles. And one of the things that I started also including in that prep doc was not just on the outcome of the call, what do we want the outcome of the call to be, but I also started including how do we want them to feel at the end of this call? Because technical, like my solution consultants or solutions engineers don't always think that way. And, whoever is on that call may not be thinking about that, but I would like, when they leave this call, they should feel confident about X, Y, and Z. They should be reassured that people like them do things like this. They should be excited. Like, I don't know anybody else who did that, but I was just like,
No, that's brilliant. Again, it
like, I
sounds
want
so
them to have the
obvious.
vibe, and I would use that word. And I'm sure that many sales, like solutions consultants smiled at that because I don't know that anybody else ever said that to them, but I was like, so this is the vibe that we're going for.
I love it.
It's so smart though, right? Like you have to be the coach for those people
Yes.
internally and make sure they understand that.
Yep.
That's such good advice. So you've been a part of a few different sales cultures now, right? Some very high performing sales cultures.
Yep.
What is it what stands out the most to you of the cultures that have been the most productive for sales reps?
Yeah. I think it's Patrick Lencioni's books that talk about like culture. And I think he talks about like humble, hungry, and smart. Right. If you can build a culture where everyone is humble, hungry, and smart, everyone wins. I can remember calling my husband after being in one onboarding, and I was like, I don't know how this company has managed to hire the 250 people that are in this onboarding class, that they're all the same type of person. It was everybody from support to sales to engineering to whatever, and they did a good job of mixing you up and getting you in different groups. And I'm like, damn, everyone is smart. Everyone here is nice. Everyone here wants to get better. I don't know how. I'm like, I was in awe of like that hiring, but then it just carries over. So then I would ping when I was at Tableau. I reached out to the rep who had just an absolute rock star. Her name was known everywhere. She did some of the biggest deals in the organization. She was the rep for JP Morgan Chase. And she had said at the end of a training about account planning, hey, if anybody wants to, talk about this, I love to help. And I was like, well, she opened the door, and I pinged her and I was like, hey, so I'm the one annoying person that's really going to take you up on this. And she ended up meeting with me. We met, I think, every other week for probably a year. And I would just bring her things like, hey, this is what I'm working on. How would you approach this? And she just was so cool about it. And in other organizations, like their absolute top reps who are doing 8-figure deals might not do that. But yeah, culture matters.
So this is a theme of teaching and wanting to learn. It's just interesting that, I mean, I don't know how many other folks that took her up on that. If it was a lot, she wouldn't have been able to spend all this time with you. So it couldn't have been that many. But it's like, yeah, I'll learn from you. It goes back to, I guess, being humble, but also being hungry to learn, to be like, yeah, I can improve. I can learn. You can teach me some stuff. Again, seems so obvious, but it's like that extra 10% of effort. I
You
think
know,
it's like a big differentiator.
it is. And going back to what's in it for me, I wondered, and I did ask her directly because I was like, I was shocked that she agreed to do that. And I was like, hey, I want to make this valuable for you. What can I do in any capacity that makes this valuable for you? And what her answer was very interesting. And Jason, to your point about if you want to really learn something, teach it. She was like, by telling you, by going over these things with you, I am reminded of like the things that I used to do that I've forgotten that I stopped doing, that I want to do again. And also, she was remote and I worked in in one of the offices, and she was like, being remote, I don't always hear what's being said like in the office. I don't, and she was like, if you can help me out with like, what you guys are hearing, we were also on two different teams. And so that was valuable to her, where I was like, hey, I'd Slack her and be like, hey, heads up, this is what I'm hearing. Cause you don't always get that. And so the thing that may be valuable to the person that is mentoring you may not be what you think, right? Like even in just them going over it, that can be valuable to them. And also, like, people love to be asked for advice. They love that, and they also love to talk about themselves. And damn it, if you've done 8-figure deals like with Fortune 100 companies, you should talk about it. You give them like the, honest appreciation, like that goes a long way.
Oh,
That's
I love that.
exactly how I've been opening a lot of doors recently to have potential selling conversations, is just asking for advice on how I should be thinking about things and getting inside their heads. Has anyone turned you down for advice like that
Oh,
or
sure.
coaching in the past?
Sure. Or just there's going to be people that don't respond, or that who just say, like who just say, I would love to, but I'm swamped. Like, absolutely. And it's just like prospecting, right? Like everyone is not going to take the meeting. But if you don't ask, someone can't say yes. And the other thing that, sometimes anytime I've had conversations with someone, whether it's been like, as I'm trying to learn about a company that I am targeting to get into as a candidate, or as a person that I am wanting to have as a mentor, or someone that I'm working with in a deal, the question is always, who else should I be talking to? If you can't mentor me, totally understand. Who else should I be talking to? And many times people are happy to do that. Like whenever if I'm trying to figure out the real deal in a company that I want to work there, if someone graciously agrees to give me 15 minutes, or share an email advice, then the other question is, who else should I be talking to? You learn a lot like that.
I just put that on my to-do list. There's 4 people I need to ask today who else I should be talking to that I've had recent conversations with. That's so simple. And again, like, this goes back to something you said earlier, which is we need to be reminded more than we need to be taught.
That's such a good one.
Yeah. Okay. I want to be mindful of time. Last question we like to ask everyone here is, what is one piece of advice or one lesson that you think about almost daily?
I would say, going back to the teaching thing, applying what you learn, right? Like most of the reps I know listen to, a podcast, or they listen to their peers' gong calls or something, but very few of them actually write something down. Very few of them block time on a calendar to actually practice whatever that thing is. And so if you don't, I'll say it in a positive way, if you take the time to put something in your own words, that's synthesizing it, that makes your brain work to understand it. And then when you practice it, that further cements it in your brain, right? If you think about top performers in other capacities, LeBron James doesn't just go to basketball practice and listen to what a coach says and nod and go, yep, sounds good. They don't do that, right? Like it doesn't matter how good you are. Like you have to practice. And I think that the absolute best people don't say, well, I've been doing this for however long, I got this. They're not above practicing and constantly working to apply those things that they know they should do. If you don't practice how you're going to execute that, you'll stop doing it.
I could not agree more on that. Well, listen, Krysten, thank you so much for joining us today. This was awesome. There's so much that I learned. I know Seth, I can see the grin on his face. I'm sure our listeners going to be learning a lot as they hear this. We'll probably have to have you on for a part 2 at some point because there's still so many more things to get to. And we're really excited to see how this career transition goes for you and to consume more of your amazing content on LinkedIn.
Thanks. This has been super fun. Yeah, I'm up for a second conversation anytime.
We closed her, Jason. You are exceptional, Krysten. Thank you. This was wonderful. Can't wait to talk to you some more.
All right. Sounds good.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Krysten.